Morena kia koutou. We're going to start off our session this morning with a karakia so we can settle into the space. And this karakia is written just for, especially for Niho Taniwha. So, me karakia tātou. Ke mihia, nā taniwha a tai. He tai nui, he taini nihi. Rongohia te niho kāwai, rongohia te niho pitomata. Matawai ki runga, matawai ki raro. Tēnei te matataketake ka ea ngā pū, ka ea ngā wawata. Koinei a Niho Taniwha, ka whakamaua kia te, ka whakamaua kia tūreki, haumie, huie, tai ki he. No mai, haere mai, very happy to be with you all this morning, and I will hand over to my hua mahi Iruani. Kei a koe hua.
Morena, everybody. Good morning, good evening, good vibes to everybody present. Tēnā koe Ricky Lee, o tō mihi whakatau I te hunga e mā taki mai. Kia ora tātou. So, an introduction to some of the kōrero and the meaning behind Niho Taniwha. Here in Aotearoa in New Zealand, and also in the Pacific, we have a rich history and culture. There are many narratives pertaining to Taniwha. In Te Ao Māori, the worldview of the native guardians. They guard the different realms within the environment of land, air, and sea. Now, these environments, they are very complex systems. Within those systems, there is an abundance of knowledge to be found. By default, Taniwha are also guardians of this knowledge. The word Niho Taniwha translates into the teeth of the Taniwha. The symbols in Niho Taniwha hold deep connections to learning, knowledge, and also genealogy, which is a key aspect of learning as teachings are often passed down through the generations. The symbols also represent the many diverse forms of wisdom across people and place. Niho Taniwha as a model of approach serves as a container to hold knowledge and new learnings, something like a wisdom tooth, if you will. As a general rule, teeth work best when being used in sync with other teeth. This is relevant when it comes to learning, as it is important to also reflect on past teachings so we can build layers which will grow our understanding. These stages of learning are also reflected in the visual representation of Niho Taniwha and its framework, as you will soon see. I would like now to bring our attention back to the karakia that Ricky Lee recited in the opening segments of our session. See, we're already reflecting back on past teachings. This karakia or mantra serves as a tool through which we can attune ourselves for the tasks set before us. This karakia or mantra speaks of seeking those who occupy the many systems so that we can gain some understanding of these systems, which again are very complex at first glance. It's important for us to take a close look into these complexities and examine it with purpose and intensity. We don't just do this for our own sake, we do this for future generations to come, for it will be our children's children who inherit these complex systems, as well as the knowledge to navigate them. And with that, I now pass the mic over to Penny.
Kia ora, Iruani, thank you very much. Well, lovely to see everybody online, some new faces and some old faces. So he Pākehā hau, ko Penny Higgins ko ingoa. I'm part of the Co-Design Lab team, and I'm just going to provide a bit of context for what we do and how Niho Taniwha as our learning system comes alive within that, just building on what Iruani has shared with you about the background to the indigenous knowledge that sits behind this practice. So the lab is based in place in South Auckland in Tamaki, Aotearoa New Zealand, which obviously is part of the wider Pacific. We are inside a local government, but connected and partner with central government agencies. So we have a local and systems place and kind of national role in connecting those worlds together. So our Our agenda, if you like, is to connect the realities of what's happening on the ground for families, the complexities and realities of their lives, with government policy, investment and decision making. The job for us is to address the structures that hold inequity in place rather than trying to design silver bullet interventions. We're looking at what are those systems conditions, the histories that create a system that has structural inequity within it, and how do we shift those conditions and return to a different kind of balanced set of ways of working. And often we see that policy is kind of a top-down process. The decision-making is very far away from families. And so the work that we're involved in is trying to create a connecting tissue between those worlds. And so it's a top-down and bottom-up, and then it's a collective learning process about what's happening in the realities of families and connecting that into the decision-making. So creating that as more of a live connection and series of actions, if you like. Sort of that work of creating a place-based approach to informing government policy. And Indigenous knowledge is core to that for us, and it always helps us to start in different places. It automatically is disruptive to the status quo that we experience here predominantly in a country that has a history of colonisation. So just sharing a little bit about what Niho Taniwha, and this is the framework, and you can see the connection to what Erowani explained, why we developed this framework and what it's helping us to do. And we will go through a little bit more of the core dimensions of it with you over the morning or over the evening or the lunchtime, whatever time it is where you guys are. So a core thing for us is that it recognises knowledge in place, and it starts with what matters to families or whānau and te reo, and starting grounded in with communities. It foregrounds Indigenous knowledge, place and lived experience, as well as other diverse forms of evidence and data. It's grounded in values and tikanga, which can be translated as cultural protocols, and I'll come back to that. It connects learning from different initiatives, so we're interested in what people are learning in different places, not just one place, but when we look collectively across local and locally led efforts, what do we see? And moving beyond that programmatic focus, we're not testing single interventions, we're trying to understand the system's conditions from learning across different places. Critically, it convenes people across the ecosystem in this learning process, so it's not commissioning research, go and find out what works or doesn't work in that community. It's pulling together folks that have capacity for influence around system settings with people actually trying to implement change on the ground, and creates a learning ecosystem across those different folks. And that happens at different scales, and we can share some examples of that. So it helps us to reverse engineer from what's working on the ground back up into systems, and helps develop a practice-based evidence that brings together, some more like the top-down kind of strategy and thinking with what does it actually take to do things differently in place when you're moving from principle into practice. So these are the things that Niho Taniwha was designed to do for us. And then I'm going to let Ange talk a little bit about how it was developed, like where did it come from, why does it have the form that it does, and then involve you all in being part of making this form and feeling what it's like to think about Niho Taniwha in the flesh. So I hand over to you, Ange. Kia ora.
Kia ora, Penny. Ngā mihi ki a tātou. Greetings, I'm Angie, and Hukirangi is my maunga, Waiapu is my awa, and Ngāti Porou is my tribe. Lovely to be with you all online this morning, this evening, this afternoon. Sending good vibes, as Erowani said to you all. I'm just going to talk a little bit about the knowledge systems that were drawn upon as we developed Niho Taniwha as a system for supporting learning and innovation and complexity. So we've drawn on Indigenous knowledge, as Penny has mentioned, and we've also drawn on Western knowledge systems as well. So we draw on Indigenous knowledge here in Aotearoa mātauranga Māori, which is Māori traditional knowledge, because it helps us to recognise and value the interconnected nature of ourselves with each other and our environment, our Earth Mother. And it helps us, as Penny said, start in different places and value different things, and it helps us to shift, we hope, systems towards different ways of being, from individual to collective, from crisis to well-being, from extraction to care for each other and for the planet. So not only did we draw on different types of knowledge bases, Indigenous and Western, but we also explored this concept and this way of learning through different disciplines. So you'll see in the picture on the right there, we were enjoying ourselves by creating an interpretive dance to figure out what Niho Taniwha, what the embodiment of Niho Taniwha was for ourselves. So we explored this concept with creatives. We also explored it with developmental evaluators and kaupapa Māori researchers. So kaupapa Māori is a research methodology that's driven by Indigenous values. So we not only were drawing on different knowledge systems, but we were drawing on different disciplines to really explore it. And the most important thing in my mind that we could do is we also explored this concept with our elders here in New Zealand. So our kaumātua, our tohunga. So those that hold deep traditional knowledge, we made sure that we were talking with those leaders, our rangatira leader, to understand if this was the right thing to be doing in terms of utilising our knowledge for better outcomes for families. So now we're going to play a video for you. Now, no, you don't need to feel nervous at all about trying to get the origami right. We're going to build one of the Niho, the teeth of the taniwha. So you can watch it back and do it again if you don't get it quite right. So this is just a fun exercise for us to get a spatial experience of Niho Taniwha. So you can start now, Penny. As Ricky Lee said, we'll ask you to have a bit of paper. So we want you to fold it in half like this, long ways. And then we're going to open it up and we're going to fold it again across to make a cross like that. So you should now have a A4 piece of paper that has we've now created a quadrant with 2 folds. And now we're going to take a corner, doesn't matter what corner, and we're going to fold it bottom corner to the top corner, and we're going to give it a really hard press. And we're going to open that up again, and we're going to do the same fold from the other corner. So bottom corner, other bottom corner, or top corner together, and fold and give it a good press. And when it opens, it will almost start to be looking like a star almost. And then this is the tricky one. We're going to take one of the corners and fold it along the fold you've just made. Penny's given us a bit of breathing space here because this is a tricky fold. So you'll be picking up the corner and folding it along the fold you've made from corner to corner. Thanks, Penny. And we're going to flip it around. Oh, we're not going to flip it. We're just going to hold it like that. And then we're going to do the same fold from the top, and it will be along the fold that you've just made. Good work, team. Now, here's another tricky part of it. The 2 smaller triangles should make a dart, and we're going to fold them onto themselves. So the triangles now fold and flip inside. And the last flap, which is a triangle shape, we're going to use that to fold it against that dart to hold it in place. And give it a good hard press. And we're going to do the same on the other side. The small triangles should form almost like a dart, fold onto themselves and down, and you're going to use, there'll be an existing triangular flap, and you're going to use that to lock the darts into place. And then you're going to give that a good fold. And just to make sure that it's going to hold, you're going to flip it down so it looks like almost like a diamond, and push it hard, and then also flip it the other way. So open it and then push it down. And there you have it. There you have it, everybody. You've made A Niho Taniwha should look like this. So it should look like this, team. So if you look, oh look, Elsa's got one. Yes, everybody show us your Niho. That's wonderful. Excellent work, team. So, what the reason why we get people to make the Niho is there's something really special about seeing it in 3D, and Penny's going to show us a picture in a second. Now, Irwini talked about knowledge systems and guardians of knowledge systems, and when you build out Niho Taniwha and you have the layers of Niho Taniwha, you start to notice some really different things. One is the base. Penny, are you able to show the picture of the there we go. What we notice about it when it's built in 3D is that the base is the biggest part of the system. And what's important about that is what Penny was talking about, what Irwini was talking about, is that it's the deep knowledge in place, indigenous and localized community knowledge, that sits at the heart of how we're going to change systems. So all of that great knowledge is our best, in our opinion, our best way of knowing what we do differently for different results, so how we drive system change. The other thing I just want to bring your attention to is that it's not, you can't quite see it here, but there are empty spaces in the Niho Taniwha. So there are tunnels and spaces that go through every side of it. And what's important to us about that is there must be spaces of unknowing for potential to emerge. If we think we know all the answers, if we fill all the spaces with our expertise and our assumptions and our solutions, then there's no way we're going to be able to do things differently or innovate for different outcomes. So that the empty spaces are just as important as the solid spaces, and that's hard to see on the paper on a 2D version, but you can see it in the 3D version, and that's really empowering, because it's okay to say we don't know the answers to some of these really gnarly, complex problems, but we will try to work together to find a way forward. That's my kōrero. Hand it back to you, Penny, is it? Yes. Kia ora tātou.
Awesome. Kia ora. Thank you, Ange. So if there's probably some people like me that couldn't do it the first time and got a bit frustrated and stopped, but might go back later and watch the video slowly a few times. Some of you who will never do it, and that's fine. And some of you who are like craft fanatics and that worked really well for you. And any of those is absolutely fine. So I'm just going to introduce now the first kind of component that we want to work with around Niho Taniwha, now that Ange has provided you the context and we've kind of done some building together. So we're going to start at the start, and that's the foundation, or the whāriki. So whāriki can translate as mat, and in this or floor covering, and so in this context it is our base, if you like. Now I can't actually see myself, but I don't know, can you see what I'm holding up? So that's like a mini version, because there would be 3 layers if we were building it for real. But we can imagine that there's multiple of these at the bottom, which are all the different sites and places that we're learning from. But these have to sit on something. They don't float, you know. Our initiatives, our communities are grounded in place and history. And so this idea of a whāriki, I knew I'd have problems with the focus. What is it sitting on? What is the thing that underpins the work that we do, that underpins what goes on in communities, what grounds how we see the world, how we make evaluations of what good looks like. And that's what the whāriki, or the foundation, asks us to make explicit and bring forward. So we talk about the whāriki as being values, tikanga or cultural protocol, and the evidence that you're drawing on, that you already kind of know and have available to you. So values could be respect, for example, or they could be in Te Ao Māori, whanaungatanga, whakawhanaungatanga. So the idea of relationships or relationality and connection is really critical. And those things tell us what's important to us and how we want to act and how we make judgments about things and what we prioritize. Tikanga being cultural protocol. So how do we do things here? What's the protocol of this place? And this is very, it's very pronounced, I guess, in places like Aotearoa, where different rohe, different iwi, different tribes have different tikanga. So when you go to a place, you find out what's the tikanga of this place, what's the right way to act here, what's the appropriate process to enter a place or to have a conversation or to engage in something. And so different places will have different versions of tikanga or cultural protocol that tell you the way to be. And then the evidence that we're drawing on. So for us, it's really important that we're prioritizing indigenous knowledge bases, or in Aotearoa in particular, mātauranga Māori, so the knowledge base of different iwi here, but also all indigenous knowledges, as well as Western knowledge where it's appropriate. And I know that those terms, they're big, fat, blunt terms, but hopefully people understand what I mean when I talk about that in terms of the dominant Western paradigm that tells us what to value in a lot of contexts at the moment, and also lived experience. So what's actually going on on the ground for families, the realities of that and the complexities of that. So those things, we try and make those explicit in terms of our whāriki. So if you had one of these, what's your work sitting on? We want to ask you, what forms the foundation of your work in your world, in your place? What are the guiding values? What might be the tikanga or cultural protocols that you follow or that you draw from when you're trying to understand how to navigate something that's going on? And what forms of evidence are you drawing on right now in your world and your work? Some of these might be really easy for you to draw on, and some of them might be like, oh, I can't, you know what, I haven't thought about that before. I'm going to stop and have a think about it. Either of those is totally fine. So we're just going to give you a couple of minutes. And again, there should be beautiful music playing for those couple of minutes, but we have had a technical difficulty seconds before. Of course, it worked fine when we did the practice run, and we just have a small hiccup. So I need you to imagine that you're listening to beautiful music while I just give you a couple of minutes to think about these things, jot down some notes, and then we're going to go have a conversation with other folks about that and then come back again. So we're just going to leave you for a minute or two to think about these things, make some notes, and then I'll come back and we're going to go into some smaller groups and have a conversation. Kia ora. Welcome back, everybody. Hopefully you had the opportunity to meet some new folks, and it would be wonderful if you could just drop a word into the chat that is a reflection of something that came up for you in that conversation. Well, there's some lovely words in there: care, empathy, curiosity, justice, interconnectivity or not, inclusion, tautoko, triangle around the world. Oh, that's lovely. And then some questions about cultural protocol and defining cultural protocol, which maybe we can come back to towards the end in a conversation, because definitely from our just the very small kind of worldview perspective that we're sitting in, that language of cultural protocols is really, really easy for some people, particularly Indigenous folks, and then harder for those of us who are kind of in a Western paradigm, who somehow, in some cases, think we're operating outside of some kind of protocol or some neutral space, when in fact all those protocols are there, the values are there, they're just not explicitly stated. So it's quite good to start unpacking that. Maybe we can come back and talk a little bit about that. Obviously, it's a big topic. It's its own corridor cultural, its own conversation, cultural protocols, but we could maybe touch on that when we come back at the end. So thanks, everybody. That's really beautiful contributions into the chat space to just get a bit of a feel for what the conversations were like. And we're just going to step through now a couple of other aspects of the Niho Taniwha learning framework and have a bit of a play with those. So we've talked about the whāriki and what the foundations are underneath the work that we're doing, and the foundations of our community. So if we think about one of these for each of the different places or different communities that we might be working with, or people where people are, those values tikanga and evidence base are different. There might be overlaps, there might be similarities, but there also might be quite strong differences. And so we want to be able to acknowledge and accommodate all of those differences and all of those depths of knowledge, but work at a collective level together around shared aspirations and goals and the system's conditions that kind of either allow us to flourish in place through those community aspirations, or that maybe prevent those things from happening. So I'm just going to step through the kind of different layers. We have that whariki we talked about. Then we have the first layer or learning space, or wahiako, which is translated into learning space, tuatahi, that first space. So that's these different sites and places. Then we have the second level, which is that collective learning. So when we look across different sites and places, what's common? What can they tell us when we look collectively at the learning from each of those different places about what works, about what the enabling conditions are, about what allows locally led or culturally grounded, culturally led practices to thrive? What do those conditions at that collective level need to look like so that in place people can do what they need and they can lead in the way they need to? So that kind of brings a collective view to the individual sites or places. And then wahiako tuatoru, that third space, is what's the system's implications then? What needs to shift in the systems? If that middle space is kind of a learning and identifying what the challenges and issues are, what does it look like to then start to implement those changes in system? What's the learning about that? What helps us to do it? What prevents it? So there's these three levels that just help us conceptualize the learning that's local, and then the learning that needs to be collective, and the learning that needs to fold back into the system. And then we keep to mind also, I just dropped them in little blue text, so you might not have even seen them pop up. That means we're always thinking about the shifts that need to happen in the system, the shifts and outcomes that are happening for families on the ground, and the learning process. Often, more conventional evaluation and evaluative thinking practices are trying to think about specific interventions or specific programs. That's not what we're focused on here. We're focused on, you might be doing specific things on the ground to make things happen, but we're interested in the collective conditions that make good happen in place. And so that means we have to think not just about what's working on the ground for whānau and families, but also what needs to change in the system. So we have both those views. What's happening locally that's successful, what needs to be in the system that increases the chances of success, and maybe take something from being like bright spots of wonderfulness that work an exception to the system, to saying how do we normalize those conditions actually across the system, so there's more often these, so it's not just bright spots or positive deviance, those things become normalized. So I'm going to just talk about how that's implied in practice then. What are some examples of those things I just said actually in the world? So the first one I'm just going to share, we're still figuring out how to visually show this stuff, so I'm kind of testing it out on you all. At a policy level, exploring play as a starting point for child wellbeing. So working with government agencies that have an interest in child wellbeing, but trying to test out what would it look like for us to develop the commissioning and policy conditions to enable that beyond services through something like play. So we're not delivering services, but we are commissioning and investing in things that grow child wellbeing. But what does it look like if we don't do that through services? And so play was a start point. So that had 3 community partners working on the ground and 1 central agency that was the learning partner in that. And that one took place over a period of 9 months, where we have these learning cycles and learning processes between those groups. And I'll show you a little bit more about what that looks like in a second. So the difference here being, historically what we used to do was kind of be commissioned to go and do some research or do a prototype with a community. Over time, what we've come to understand is by doing that, we're sort of taking away the learning from the system component and the system, the folks in the system who have the capacity to change those settings. And they need to be brought into the learning process and see themselves as collectively responsible for that change process too. It's not just looking out at community and saying, hey, what do you need to do differently? It's actually realizing that we're all collectively going to have to shift and change the way we practice in order for things to be different. So it brings those different national and local partners into a learning relationship over time. So another example, we were trying to figure out what is the investment policy and measurement settings and workforce shifts that are needed for changes in a universal health service system. So if we want something to look really different in terms of how a universal service is delivered and experienced, and all the settings that go with that at different levels, what might that look like? So that is still ongoing. It's been going for 18 months. There's 5 different community partners from around the country, and again, one main national agency involved in that ongoing connection and learning up and down through the process. Another one which is more regional. So this is a local government area, and so local government having multiple community assets and sites in the community, just one region, but multiple physical assets that become connection points with community, and working with community and with the local iwi or tribes in those communities to say, what does it look like when these assets and facilities are designed in a way that work for you? What do we need to do for our operating model? What do we need to see, invest in, measure and track? So that's ongoing. They've embedded the model into the council team so that they can just keep doing that on an ongoing basis and having that learning relationship, developing practice-based evidence about what works and what matters. They're not trying to design perfect interventions and replicate them. They're trying to understand what are the conditions we need at a regional level so that local communities can grow what they need for what's in their place and the communities that are there. And then the last one, which again was a national, my map's dropped off, but it's a New Zealand map. And that was convening multiple agencies, at least 6. There was a sort of expanded and contracted over time. So agencies that are responsible for policy, for commissioning, for national strategy, 2 regional partners, and then those regional partners and some actually of the national agencies had multiple on-the-ground community partners. So it's much messier than the first 3 where I can name specifically who the partners are. It's more like a collective that's convened, that's been going for 2 years, that makes sure that the learning on the ground about what works and what needs to be amplified in the system is going and influencing the policy, strategy and commissioning mechanisms that are being developed at national level. So that, again, it's an ongoing learning relationship. So one of the things that's critical to enabling that to happen, this kind of collective learning process and the layering of that, is the idea of learning questions. And so that just shapes everybody's action, because we're not doing research, we're actually trying to do the thing, but we're trying to learn as we're doing it. So we're trying to implement change or test a new idea out, but make sure that we're doing it in a way that's producing evidence and that we're adapting as we go and we're feeding that back into the right levels of the system. So the learning questions orientate that action towards something that isn't just doing and delivery, to also doing and learning. So we have learning questions at that first level for each of these kind of levels. We've got a learning question, at least one, and that's particular to the site. It's particular to the place or the community. What are they trying to figure out with this thing that they're doing? What are they trying to learn through, perhaps? In this case, I've just selected that first example, exploring play as a starting point for child wellbeing. So if you're working in a particular community, particular partner, and they're testing out stuff with families and they're trying to do different things, and they'll have a learning question associated with their practice that they're trying to figure out that's particular to them based on their own evidence, values, and tikanga. But then when we look across those multiple sites, in this case 3 different communities that were testing out this idea, what's the collective thing we're all learning together about policy settings, commissioning, investment, and what government funders need to think about to enable these communities to do what works for them? And then what do they need to do with that information? So what is the change that they need to test out in terms of the commissioning practices and policy practices? So there's questions related to each of these levels that help orientate the action. And that's what you're kind of convening on over time. What are we learning about the answers to these questions? Are they the right questions? What's the evidence that we're developing that helps build the case for change? And when we try and make change, what do we learn about what may or may not be easy, say, for example, in tweaking commissioning settings? Is it a legislative shift that needs to happen, or is it just an interpretation of procurement rules, like unpacking that level of granularity? So it kind of looks like this, where you've got the different sites and places are going about doing their thing, but they've got learning loops where they're collecting data against those learning questions. And that could be very lightly just stopping in, having a conversation. It could be through a range of quantitative and qualitative methods, but they're collecting learning about what's happening for them in their place as they go separately. And then at key points in time, we're coming together and bringing that learning together at that second layer, that collective level, and saying, what are all these different sites telling us and learning about the collective and conditions the system setting level for enabling things in place. So it's kind of apart together, and you're building up the practice-based evidence as you go over time. So people are learning in place and adapting to what they're learning. So they have that local learning cycle, but they're kind of to a tahi level. They're capturing and sharing that. And we're having learning loops at these second and third levels. And that becomes a collective sense-making process. So people from across the system are making sense of that and saying, okay, well, what does this mean for me? That's interesting, hadn't thought about it that way, or that really affirms what we thought, but we didn't have any evidence for that before. And it is developing a practice-based evidence that can sit alongside other forms of academic or evidence-based practice, which may not be connecting with the kind of implementation and reality space of lived experience. There's lots of information. I just want you to pause and just take a piece of that and think about something that you're working on right now. I'm assuming that most of you are trying to do something that requires something new or different. So just have a think about something that you're trying. It might be an initiative you've got on the go now, or something that you would like to start playing, trying something new with. Have a think about what is it that you need to learn. Like, you might know already a bunch of stuff, but if it's not already implemented and happening in the world, then there's probably things you don't know too. Maybe about how it's going to actually be taken up in the community, or what community, the role of community is going to be, or there'll be questions that you haven't answered yet about how this is going to work and how it's possible and what needs to change. So have a think about that. What's that learning focus that you will start with, and draft a learning question for that, or something that could be a question. Nothing, to make it perfect. It could be that you're working at that first level and you're really clear it's a local question, or it could be that you're working at a collective level and you actually want to know something across a bunch of different places, and that's either of those is fine. Eventually, you can have a think about, well, how might you be answering that question? What sort of data collection would help you to know the answer? But just start with the first one. Just think about an initiative you're working on and what a learning question might be for you in that space.
Kia ora tātou, no mai, hoki mai. Welcome back, everybody. Hoping you had some great conversations and made some new connections in your groups. Just before we go to opening it up for some reflections or questions, I just want to acknowledge some of the wonderful insights in the chat, particularly a reference to the wā, and we just acknowledge the deep wisdoms of the Pacifica, and acknowledge that they are, that is a very important connection for us as tangata whenua here in Aotearoa as well. Also some reflections on the hierarchy of Niho Taniwha and how it may be interpreted traditionally, but how we're showing it as the power of our Niho Taniwha is at the bottom, at the base. That's the engine room. But now we'll just invite you, it's a fairly small group, just to unmute and share some reflections or ask a question if you'd like.
Kia ora, Nick here. I'll leap in. From the group that is the triangle around the world, we had New Zealand, Germany and Scotland represented. It was interesting how three very, very different projects all talked about space, and we all talked about creating something out of that, but then the incredible importance of keeping that alive, Angie. it's very easy to get all the energy around setting stuff up and getting everyone excited. But so our questions were around things. I love that question that's just been put in the chat. What are people ready for? And we also talked about what's needed to guide and lead, and also is it what others might be saying that we're not. So that's just some reflections from the Triangle Round the World group. Kia ora.
Perhaps I could speak to, so what does it take to work in this way and keep the energy up? Well, for sure it takes a team of people with quite interesting and diverse skill sets and backgrounds. But for us, if we're working across those three learning spaces, then it takes people playing specific roles and holding specific knowledge bases and specific practices. So in our team, we often have someone who's in the working alongside the team, but with a view to where are the system levers, what are the current system opportunities that we need to be focused on and creating the conditions to leverage. Somebody holding the practice around working alongside our families and our communities and holding that in a really safe way, in a way that our families and communities are respected, our indigenous people are respected, and then somebody who's got an eye on how we're evidencing, consolidating the learning and what are we doing with that learning to implement it. So that's broadly how we sort of think about the different roles in the team for the different components of the work.
Thank you. That's really helpful, Angie.
Maybe from our group, also at the end we talked about win-win-win. I know it's a little bit used term, but like the thing when you feel like you're working against a hierarchy or there's somebody with a big ego that kind of slows you down, and then maybe thinking about the situation where everybody can kind of win, and then a little bit take, it's frustrating to work against big egos, but maybe you can work with the big egos and not against the big egos. So I like the triangle, like the three parts in there.
Thanks, Sophie. Well, as you'll all know, mindsets are one of the biggest challenges in sort of change innovation work. But what we've been learning about, and I'm sure you could all share your own experiences, is that we're very careful now where we're trying to do this work. So we're very careful to recognise the conditions that are required. Otherwise, it's too hard, as you were describing. So not everybody has to be on board, but you have to have some kind of leadership mandate or some leadership intent in our experience. Not all of them, but you can't have an absence of that. So that's just one of the things that we've learned, and we've quite often said no to pieces of work or no to being involved in certain things because we're recognizing the conditions aren't there to be able to do the work, and that's just going to be a waste of our energy. And it's also going to be a waste of their time if they're not ready to do the work.
And Lindsay's dropped a question in.
Yes.
Do you want me to read it, or can you see it?
I can see it. Would you like to answer it?
It's a lovely Lindsay question. Thanks, Lindsay.
Would you like to start answering it, Penny, and I can jump in?
Oh, sure. Yeah, I mean, this is a real journey for us. So we've been working on understanding this for maybe it's like 6 years now, where we understood that we needed something to help us do the work that wasn't available through existing kind of evaluation things, but we could learn a lot from what people were already doing, but we didn't have something that served the needs that we had in terms of starting in a culturally grounded place and then growing up from there. So it's been a real journey. I mean, I think probably the main thing that I would say is as we use it, we learn about it. So it's a living system for us, and others have picked it up and started to use it, and then we go and talk to them about what are they learning about it, what's it doing for you, and then we feed it back into what we're sharing out into the world. So it's an ongoing learning process in and of itself.
Nice, Penny. There's another question here. I hope I'm getting this name right, from Katia or Katia. How can change agents help people feel safe to share their fears and overcome them? One of the concepts we're exploring is convening learning platforms, which brings change agents across the system together and sort of creates a safe space to be sharing practice and then implementing that practice across the system wherever the work's being held. And our good friend and colleague Amy Hadrup will talk about islands of sanity. So they're safe spaces that people are coming into and they're able to share all the challenges of the work that they're doing. But there's an orientation to learning in the platform and an orientation to implementation. So it just gives you a little bit of space to be able to do the thinking and the reflecting that you might not be able to do in the work or with the team that you're working in. So that's one of the ways that we've been doing it. They're often online platforms, sort of community of practice like forums, but to be our emphasis is on, it's not just sharing the practice and the learning, it's helping each other to implement it and then evidencing the practice-based evidence of doing that work. But it's 5 to 9 and it's been lovely to spend time with you all, but I need to now hand it over to Ricky Lee, who's going to talk about where you might access some resources and I think a survey. Kia ora, Ricky Lee.
Kia ora, Angie. Tēnā koutou anō i te whānau. We are just going to wrap up our session today. Firstly, there are a few resources available, and Penny's just sharing our slide here. These are also accessible on our website, so Penny will place some links in the chat. So if you'd like to explore Niho Taniwha more, there's some introductory documents there, and also one that includes translations too, because we use a lot of our Māori language within our framework. So hoping that that's easily accessible for you all via the website. We also would like to invite you to please share some feedback with So we're currently working on updating it, but yeah, that's what's available now. We'd like to invite you to also share your feedback. It's a minute form. It takes a minute to fill out with feedback for the Creative Bureaucracy Festival on our session. So it's a quick feedback form, and Penny's just put the link in the lab there. But yeah, just in closing our session, on behalf of the team of the lab, ka nui ana te mihi mai oha, kia koutou katoa. Thank you so much for joining us. We hope that you've got a few gems to take away and enjoyed connecting with others on our workshop this evening, wherever we are. And I will hand our rākau over to Iriwini, who will close us off with a karakia. So tēnā anō koutou. Kia ora. Kia koe Iriwini.
Kia ora, everybody. Ka mihi atu ki a tātou ko hui mai tēnei wā. Just a warm acknowledgement to everybody that is in attendance for this hui and this kōrero. We hope that the mahi that has been, the work that has been shared with you is helpful and understanding, and soon will be able to be explored within your spaces of working. Just to close down our session at this time, ka tuku karakia ahau. Ka wairea ki runga, ka wairea ki raro, ka wairea ki ngā tahataha o tēnei tira e. Wairea kia tika, wairea kia pono, wairea kia mā, wairea kia whakangāwari ai ngā mea whakamataku katoa. Tūturu e rangi, tūturu e papa, tūturu o whiti whakamaua kia tīna. Haumi e, hui e, tāi ki.